If you've been a longtime viewer here at the channel, you might know that every Monday we have a company-wide meeting here at Chat Sports, and our bosses like to rip us a new one. I don't know why. We work pretty hard, I like to think here. But for the Falcons Today channel, we were told the likes were not up to their standards. So help us get our bosses off our asses and hit that thumbs up button for one reason and one reason only. If you've got a boss that rides your derriere and you would like to get some separation, hitting that thumbs up icon will go a long way for producer Rolly and I. Okay, now that we got that out of the way, let's talk about 5 Falcons players that are on the hot seat entering training camp, right? 5 guys that are not super duper comfortable with whether it's a starting job or even a roster spot. So we're going to break this down, starting with Desmond. I'm just kidding with you guys. We're not doing Desmond Ridder. He's not on the hot seat. I know that got the haters all worked up. But let's talk about Mykal Walker to start things off as a player who might not be very cemented in his role as a starting linebacker on this team if he ends up starting as an inside linebacker on this team. Last year, he had 107 tackles, 4 tackles for loss, a sack, and 6 pass breakups. One would think he's on a good trajectory to be another impact player at the linebacker position in 2023. But when we look at this linebacker depth chart here, I'm not quite sure, right? Is Kaden Elliss going to be a rotating player outside with Lorenzo Carter and Bud Dupree? Or is he going to be knocked inside and be a great blitzing, pass rushing inside linebacker next to Troy Andersen? We're going to wait and see how Ryan Nielsen sort of draws up his starting front 5 in his linebacker core. But there's a chance that Mykal Walker, despite having 107 tackles last year, might not have a starting role in this defense, which seems crazy to say out loud. But after free agency and after adding after bringing back Lorenzo Carter and adding Kaden Elliss and adding Bud Dupree, if it comes down to Andersen, Ellis, and Mykal Walker for 2 starting jobs on the inside, I won't be shocked if they go with Andersen and Ellis for a little yin and yang, right? Where Ellis brings you some pass rush upside and Andersen can be a better run stopper and a green dot and a good voice for the middle of the defense. So if Mykal Walker gets relegated to the bench or even gets cut if he doesn't ball out during the preseason, that ladder is a much more extreme, but he's definitely on the hot seat, if you will, entering training camp. This next guy, as a Tennessee grad, I cannot stand. And frankly, I don't know how, no pun intended, Feleipe Franks is still on this roster. I'm not quite sure if he knows he's still a tight end, but it's time to cut Feleipe Franks. He offers you absolutely nothing, and I just didn't like him at Florida. He sucked at Arkansas, and I'm kind of just airing out my dirty laundry from my SEC days. But Feleipe Franks' career receiving stats, it's a whole bunch of donuts on the board. 2 targets for the former quarterback turned tight end. And I think every single day Feleipe Franks shows up to the facility and his ID badge works, it is a miracle for him. He has fallen down the tight end depth chart. I know I'm really getting into the guy here, but bear with me. Kyle Pitts, Jonnu Smith, and Parker Hesse are all your top 3 tight ends. No question about it. So that leaves Feleipe Franks kind of flirting with that 4th tight end, competing for a practice squad spot. So if an injury pops up, he's sort of the first one to be promoted to the active roster. But what does Feleipe Franks offer you as a tight end 4 or 5? Absolutely nothing. Move on from the guy. I know this is just my personal vendetta against Florida football here, but move on from Feleipe Franks. He's definitely on the hot seat entering training camp. Now, name someone who you think is on the hot seat here. We've gone through 2 names so far. Is it one of those 2 guys? Is it someone else? Let me know what your thoughts are in the comment section. And hey, while you're down there, we are closing in on 13,000 subscribers. We are less than 300 away. So consider subscribing if you have not already. It's completely free. So if you don't like the content, you can always unsubscribe. But we appreciate those of you who have subscribed. My 3rd player on the hot seat is Jalen Mayfield. Now, hot seat is maybe not the exact term to put him on because he's been getting some good reps with the first team and second team offense at different points during OTAs and minicamp. But the Mayfield experiment is just not going swimmingly well because I don't think the Falcons know what position he really is, right? former third-round pick coming out of Michigan. Wasn't exactly sure if he would be a tackle, if he would be a guard. Came out as a tackle, moved him to guard. Unfortunately, was injured, missed a whole season, and now we're at a point where Mayfield is what? I don't know. We've seen him work at both positions so far. His career PFF grades from 2021 through 2022, 48.7 overall. Much better run blocker than pass blocker. 11 sacks allowed. It's just not seemingly clicking at the moment. And after drafting Matthew Bergeron, I'm going to assume he will be your starting left guard week 1. I know he might not be if there was a game tomorrow. But the good news for Bergeron is there's not a game tomorrow. In fact, there's not a game for 76 days or 75 days at this point. So when you factor that in, plus the Falcons drafting 3 players on the interior offensive line, to me that signals they don't see a long-term future with Mayfield, whether it's a rotating player on the interior, kind of that 6-man, first one off the bench, or even as a starter if they wanted to move Bergeron to tackle down the line or something like that. I think Mayfield has a lot to prove during training camp, that he has a for sure roster spot. And if not just a for sure roster spot, he is viewed as the 6-man on the offensive line. Now, what I do view as a good deal are these awesome Atlanta Falcons retro t-shirts. They're also on sale. So if you like the shirt and you like a good deal, then this is the perfect t-shirt for you. Go to chatsports.com/ATL retro. That link's in the comments and the description of the show. One more time, chatsports.com/ATL retro. Fanatics came out with shirts like this for all 32 teams. And I think the Falcons have some of the best. If you want some ugly ones, go look at the Broncos. Woof. Now, moving on to our 4th Falcons player on the hot seat. That is Eddie Goldman. We talked about him during yesterday's show, but I kind of want to go a little bit more in depth on Eddie Goldman because the former 2nd-round pick out of Florida State was MIA for majority of the last 3 years of his career. He has not played a snap since Week 18, 2021. He signed with Atlanta in 2022, and then he retired promptly 13 days later. He opted out of 2020, so he's only played 1 season in the last 3 years. And when you look at Atlanta's defensive line, Eddie Goldman right now is in line to be the backup for David Onyemata. And a backup defensive lineman always gets some good reps and some good runs because you're going to have a solid rotation there. Onyemata is going to play 60 to 65% of snaps. Goldman's going to play the other 20 to 25, and then someone else will play the last couple of snaps here or there. But Eddie Goldman, so far, at least the last 4 years of his career, when he was available, he was pretty good for Chicago, right? 2018 as a run-stopping interior defensive lineman to casually chip in for 3 sacks definitely shows he has some pass rush upside, but he is a good run stopper, no question about it. The issue is, how committed is he to playing football? He opted out in 2020, which I'm not going to call him out too much for that. A lot of players made that decision. But the point is, he's only played 1 season in the last 3 years. So Goldman has to prove that he is back in football shape because taking all of last year off and then taking all of 2020 off, he doesn't have a whole lot of reps under his belt as of late. And it's been a little while since he was playing a high volume of snaps. So we need to see in the heat of August when the sun's cooking down on you and the pads are on and the helmet's got you feeling like you're in a toaster oven, that he can still play football at a high rate. So Goldman definitely in that hot seat territory going into this training camp. Now, speaking of training camp and the Falcons in general, it's June. Things are a bit slow. Believe me, I know that. So, off-the-wall question here. How many wins do the Falcons have in line for them this upcoming season? I'm going with a solid 9-8 season. I think for how easy their schedule is and how many returning players they are getting that showed some good promise last year and the year before, 9 wins is definitely in reach for Atlanta. The big question mark, of course, is Desmond Ridder. But if he plays well, 9 wins might end up being the floor for this team, and they could even get up to 10 or 11 wins. 5th and final player on the hot seat is KhaDarel Hodge. Let's take a look at our favorite room on this team, the wide receiver room, because this wide receiver room definitely has some question marks after Drake London and Mac Hollins in terms of who's a lock to make this roster. If you want to make the roster, if you want to make an NFL roster, be a wide receiver for the Atlanta Falcons because it is fair game after the first 3 spots, right? When you look at the Falcons wide receivers, Drake London, Matt Collins, Scotty Miller, I think they're all locks to make this roster. After that, it's fair game. It is open season. It's a good competition between Penny Hart, Frank Darby, KhaDarel Hodge, J.J. Arcega-Whiteside, Slade Bolden, Kalen Harris, and Josh Ali. Those guys are all competing for 5, maybe 6 wide receiver positions. I don't know exactly how many Arthur Smith plans to take on this roster, but given the nature of how this offense is going to be designed, I don't think it'll be 7 wide receivers. I think it could be 5, maybe even 6. So Hodge has to show that he is valuable, but more importantly, he is a top 5, top 6 wide receiver because after those top 3 guys, like we said, it is going to be a competition, and Hodge would appear to be someone who is leaning more so towards the likely than unlikely at this point, just given his experience. Over the last 4 seasons, they're not glamorous numbers, but compared to the rest of the room, it's 202 more yards than a lot of players on this team. At least that's what he did last season, putting up a touchdown as well. So KhaDarel Hodge, I think, is on the hot seat just because this wide receiver room is such a big question mark, and he would seem like someone who's in line to make the roster, but if he has a slow camp, nothing's guaranteed for anyone past the first 3 wide receivers. That's going to do it for us on today's show. Thank you all so much for tuning in. We will sign off, and we will see everyone later.